Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth presentation in the Leadership Development Group's Future of Work webinar series. The topic of this webinar, Support Collaboration, is being presented by Robert Sachs, PhD, former VP of National Learning at Kaiser Permanente, and Chair of TLD Group's Advisory Board. I'm Lisa Clark, Director of Coaching and Operations with the Leadership Development Group. Just a few quick notes before we get started. Please note that all attendees are in listen mode only and are automatically on mute for the duration of the webinar. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. However, please feel free to submit your queries via the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel throughout the presentation, and we will present them to Bob at the end of the call. Additionally, please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will provide a link to the recording and all of the handouts for this and the other sessions in the series to all registrants in the coming days. We also want to mention that this 5-part Future of Work learning series has been approved for 5 professional development credits through the Society of Human Resource Management. We appreciate your attendance and hope that you find this webinar valuable. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Tracy Duberman, President and Founder for the Leadership Development Group, for a brief introduction.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. Welcome to our 4th learning series in our Future of Work series. Today's series is focusing on, or today's presentation is focusing on supporting collaboration. We know that the challenges your organizations are facing today require the input and expertise of people with disparate views and backgrounds to spark insight and innovation. As your presenter today, Bob Sachs, and I wrote about in our book, From Competition to Collaboration, we know this same diversity of ideas and perspectives also makes collaboration a challenging endeavor. Successful collaboration requires groups to develop relationships and trust, for members to demonstrate specific mindsets and skill sets, and for the establishment of clear team roles, processes, norms, and goals. These elements are more difficult to establish when work is performed remotely. As we all know, remote work can lead to meeting fatigue and missed opportunities to build relationships with others that are critical to generating ideas and for decision-making and learning. This session has been designed to explore the value and difficulty of collaboration and the elements of successful collaborations. We will also provide tools for how to support successful collaborative efforts by optimizing in-person and remote meetings, and by leveraging the increasingly available digital collaboration tools, which you will have an opportunity to experience yourselves at the end of the presentation. So stick around. I am excited to introduce Bob Sachs, who will lead our session. He is TLD Group's Advisory Board Chair and a talent strategy advisor and executive coach. Bob was formerly Vice President of National Learning and Development at Kaiser Permanente and Vice President and Managing Director of the Hay Group, which is now a part of Korn Ferry. He has had multiple opportunities to collaborate with many throughout his long, illustrious career, and I'm very excited for him to share his wisdom with us today. So welcome, Bob. Take it away.
Thank you, Tracy, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm on the West Coast, so some of you are probably just hitting lunchtime. I've got a lot to cover today, so why don't we get to it? As we go through the presentation, my hope is that you will be able to come away with a clear view of both the value and the difficulty of collaboration, what it is you can do about that, both in terms of the actions and behaviors you take, and some of the ways in which you design and structure your collaboration, and that you'll be able to, as a result of that, be able to develop effective plans that will allow you to collaborate both in person and remotely, and use platforms, technology, as a support to that collaboration. So let me start off with the definition of collaboration. As you can see here, it's a process, and I think that's the important point I really want to make, that it's a process of trying to bring together all these different points of view and capabilities with a group of people who are not part of a formal team. And so the real task at hand here is, how do you do that effectively? And I like the way that the Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson talks about this in a book she wrote called Teaming. And there she really looks at teams and collaboration more as teaming. And the important point there is it's a verb. It's very action oriented. So it's something that you have to do in a very dynamic way, and that continually requires you to adjust as the collaboration defines. So that's kind of the approach that we're looking at helping you support. And let's get a bit into why that's important. The kinds of challenges that you're facing today in your organization likely require more and more collaboration, because collaboration does in fact create greater innovation and supports the learning and efficiency of the organization and the collaborators. With the kinds of problems we are all facing today, the uncertainty of the future, the crisis, certainly as we've come through the pandemic and are trying to get to the other end of the tunnel there. Customer needs are shifting. We have new competitors who are entering our markets, and the boundaries of industries are shifting. For those of you who are working in the healthcare space, you now face CVS as a healthcare provider, Amazon as a pharmacy, and technology companies are beginning to become managers of chronic conditions and helping people to maintain health. So there's a lot going on here that we've not had to face before, and collaboration and the strength that it brings is an important part of making, excuse me, being able to get through that and move your organization forward. So we want to do a quick poll here. It's our first poll, and let me just read through this, and then Lisa's going to bring the poll up for you. Which of these organizational challenges benefits the most from the input of people with different expertise, different views, and varying backgrounds? In other words, collaboration. So the list there includes business process improvement, so that's changing some of the key business processes within your organization. Service improvement, changing the service processes in your organization. A service development, so creating new services, new products, or enhancing those services, or new ways of engaging your customers, your patients, your members, depending on how you view those key stakeholders. So just take a few seconds, pick one of those that you think is would most benefit from your perspective.
Okay, we're going to close the poll.
Give us the results.
Can you see that, Bob?
I can see it a bit, but it's a little small, so if you could read it off, that would be great.
I'll read them out. Okay, so 35% are saying services, product offering development and enhancement, followed by 29% with business process improvement, and 18% for both service improvement and customer engagement.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So interesting response. I wasn't really sure which one of these you all might pick. I can tell you that all of these are actually important. Collaboration is an important way to work on all of these. And that's because none of these are driven by vertical functional technical expertise. And you really need collaboration when the functional expertise is not sufficient to solve the problem or grab the opportunity in front of you. These are all horizontal processes. They're all complex. And so the collaboration becomes important. And this is particularly true the more transformational or innovative a solution you're trying to look for. So hopefully your organization is and will continue to use collaboration to work on issues related to each of these. Now, as important as collaboration is, it's also not easy. You probably have either personally said to yourself or heard people talk about collaboration as it just takes too long. I can never get meetings scheduled. It's hard to get everybody to show up. It's just very, very inefficient. Or, I don't know these people. Why should I put myself out there? If I'm coming up with new ideas that I'm not sure are going to work, why would I trust that others are going to respond appropriately. It doesn't really have that much value to me. I already know the problem. I think I already know the answer. Why do I want to take the time to work with all these people? And then finally, it's political. All people do is focus on their own priorities, their own objectives, and they don't really care about the things that others care about or about the things that I care about. These things are all true about what can happen if collaboration is not done well, and any of these can derail that collaboration. And the more diverse the collaboration, the more strangers are gathered in the room, the harder it is. That's because there are no established work routines. So in fact, it is more inefficient until those work routines are put into place. Trust is harder when they have no shared experience. And so you need to find ways to create that shared experience in kicking off the collaboration exercise. It can be low value because many of the people don't really understand the expertise and the capability represented in the room. And until you're able to appreciate and understand what is there with you and what people bring to the party, it's hard to be able to get the most out of it. And then finally, allegiance to our home teams is typical. We all tend to look at the world from our own eyes, and it's not unusual to do that. And again, the more strange people are in terms of background and level of knowledge of those people, the harder that challenge can be. So collaboration is valuable, but it's not easy. How do we move beyond that? And I would submit that one of the basic components is mirrored in this quote from George Shultz. Some of you may know George Shultz, who he was. He passed away in his 90s not too long ago. He was still an active contributor at Stanford University out here on the West Coast. And as you can see, he held many important roles in his career. And he felt that trust, and I'm adding psychological safety to that, is in fact the important coin of the realm. That if you were going to do anything diplomatically, if you were going to do anything across the government, you needed to have trust. And building trust takes intention, it takes time, and is ongoing. Every interaction you have in your collaboration can either contribute to or detract from the amount of trust that's available. And it's key that you work on it because it's the foundation for everything. Trust starts with the right mindset and the right skill set. You need to enter the collaboration with an open mind. You need to be looking to learn from others and appreciate what others might contribute and what kinds of things you can know that you don't know about today. And you need to have a good balance between focusing on the task at hand or the process and the relationship going on with across the group. And you have to have a good balance between what you're working on and how you're doing that work. Those are critical mindsets that you should be coming into these collaborations with. And you then need to have the skill sets that can convert what is a group of people who don't know each other well into an effective collaborating team. That requires you to be able to build connections, to actively listen, to be able to do brainstorming, to draw people out, and to manage your own impact. And you've got to be able to resolve conflict because those are going to come up when you have different people in the room who come from different points of view. Conflict is inevitable. It's something that you have to face up to and step up to. And you have to be effective at resolving that conflict, interest-based problem solving, where you really take time to understand everyone's point of view, why things are important to them, is a great technique. And if you're not familiar with that, we don't have time to go through that today, but it's worth Googling and taking a look at it. The good news about this skill set is it can be developed, and organizations actually do take the time to do that. And I would encourage you and your organization, if you're not already doing this, to find ways to build these capabilities. And let me give you an example of one organization that does this. Pixar, which needs to bring very different capabilities together in order to create those wonderful movies that they make for us. actually focuses on building collaborative skills in their people. They have specific training for it, and they also actually have coaches that will go into significant collaboration sessions and help the team collaborate. So, and they have found that both of these things really do not only build the skills, but help to reinforce the mindset that I'm talking about here that you need in order to be effective at collaborating. By the way, none of these things have anything to do with being remote or in person. These things that we're talking about right now are things that you need to have in place for collaboration, regardless of the context in which that collaboration is taking place. So let's continue on. If you're the leader of a collaborative effort, you set the tone. You are the one who really begins to let people know that this is a place where I can trust the people and where I can take risks with my ideas and my approaches. And you do that by beginning to talk a bit about yourself, why this work is important to you, what capabilities you think you bring to the table, and what capabilities you don't have, and why you appreciate the what the people around the table are able to contribute to the overall work. It's important that you build in opportunities for people to check in. Certainly during COVID, something that most of us have tried to do when we're on one of our many Zoom calls is to spend some time asking people if they're doing okay. I think that's a great way to build trust, and it's something you should actually build in to your into your process. Another thing is, don't assume that someone's experience, and it's important to ask questions about what's going on, and also to be aware and accepting of different styles and approaches. Again, speaking from a standpoint of remote, let me give you a personal story here about how dangerous it is to make assumptions without checking them out, or potentially dangerous, I'm happy to say. So I chair a board of a nonprofit, and we've been having our board meetings remotely for the last year. I was noticing that one of our most senior board members, actually one of the other officers, seemed to be looking at another screen most of the time, rather than looking at the screen that we were all using for Zoom. And my initial thought was, why is this person not paying attention to the meeting? Clearly, this person is multitasking. However, I was fortunate that I did not say anything in the meeting. I did check in afterwards, and it turns out that this person has two screens going, one of which actually displays presentation materials, and the other which is the actual meeting process. And so this person was looking at the meeting materials and then only looking at the screen when he was talking to the group. So that's important, was important for me to understand, and was also important for me to let him know how he might be perceived so that the rest of the group would not see him as disengaging. So that's an example, again, of not making assumptions and really trying to be accepting of how people are doing things. Other steps that are involved in this is really specifically trying to build collaboration across the team. And you can see some things listed here that allow you to do that. I do want to emphasize how important this is, and also how neglected taking the time is to explicitly take concrete steps to build connections can be. Tracy and I Tracy mentioned that she and I wrote a book together called From Competition to Collaboration. Well, we actually did a course this past year for ACHE, an online course based on that book. And one of the things that we asked participants to do was to take a self-assessment against the leadership model that the book describes. And it has 4 components. One of the components is aligning stakeholders. That component was by far the weakest component that people identified for themselves. And in particular, they said that they did not do enough of taking concrete steps to build connections and enabling and encouraging dialogue. And let me give you one example from one of the participants, as this person was working through a challenge that she had identified to work on through the course. She said, I have to step back from my original plan. I have to find more time to encourage open dialogue and exchange interests, ideas, perspectives, and information. The point why I'm emphasizing this so much is this is something we tend to take for granted. We tend to get focused on the content and the task more than the relationship and the process. So it's important that you actually take this time up front to actually just focus on building these connections. Now, once you've got this foundation established, and I say once, but in fact, this is something you have to continue to reinforce all throughout your collaborative effort. There are some key elements that we're going to talk about that you need to explicitly build in place. Again, this is focusing on the process and the relationships, not the task and the result that you're trying to build. You can see here that shared purpose, establishing clear norms, making sure you have effective team members, that you build role and process clarity, and that the team knows how decisions are made are key elements that will enable you to build trust, psychological safety, the kind of experimentation with ideas that you need, and the willingness to take action with those ideas, and the full engagement of all the participants. And those are the elements that you need in order to create the solutions that you're looking for. It takes intention, and I would suggest as we go through this, I've tried to build the slides in a way that they're almost checklists for you about what you can be doing for each element. And so I would hope that you could use these to kind of monitor the process of your collaboration and see how you're doing and be able to intervene and take steps where you need to. Let's talk about the first one, shared purpose. Typically, and again, this is something that Tracy and I talk about in our book, in order to create a collaboration, you as the leader will have a vision of what needs to be done, what the problem is, what you want to accomplish, and what even potential solution might look like. That initial vision helps you to determine that you need to build a collaboration, and it helps to inform who you invite in to become part of that collaboration. So those are all very important things for you to do. However, now that you've got people together, you need to revisit and evolve that initial idea. And you can do that by focusing on the team, on the questions that you see listed here. Things like, who will the solution affect? What benefits are they going to realize? What is good going to look like? It's important that you dialogue about these things, that when people talk, you and everybody else listen, that there's a process for synthesizing the different ideas coming up, and that you ultimately are in a position to evolve your initial thoughts into a broader purpose statement that has fully engaged everybody. And you need to be aware that you're probably going to continue to evolve that statement. Purpose is critical, but it also needs to be updatable. It needs to be reflective of continuous learning. And you need to both invite people to craft that journey at the beginning and continue on that journey with you throughout the process. So purpose really helps to ground the team and build the motivation, the focus that you need, and helps to reinforce the trust and safety, particularly in the process that you use for building that. Let's look at clear norms. Clear norms are really important because when you have a new relationship, the things can get awkward. If you use the beginning of the relationship to begin to establish some of these things, then your relationship is going to be able to build more positively and miss some of the potential stumbling points. And so some of the things that I would suggest you really try to look at is how you're going to give feedback to each other. That's a really important one. Creating some ground rules for that. Things like we will be talking about people's ideas, not them as people, not as individuals. Ideas, not individuals. That we're going to listen to people giving feedback and not interrupt them. That we're going to adopt the philosophy of interest-based problem solving, where everybody's interest is valid and needs to be listened to and understood. Other kinds of rules that you might want to think about is job titles don't matter. Senior members speak last because you may have different levels of individual who are participating in this. The important point here is that you need to establish some of these norms at the beginning of the process. And by the way, let me also mention that in terms of how you're going to evaluate both team process, so what are you going to do and how often will you do that? Because I think everyone needs to understand that team process is important, and this is a way to do that. And there are a lot of good techniques. I mentioned here after action reviews, where you spend time talking about what were objectives at that point, what was actually happening, why did it happen, and what could be done better. I'd also encourage you to make use of one of the approaches that David Drew spoke about in his webinar, potential problem analysis, where in fact what you're in essence doing is an after action review except before the action. These are all good processes to take to really begin to establish some norms and to begin to think about how you want to move forward. And again, if you do this with a group of people who haven't known each other well, you're going to find less conflict, more willingness to give and receive feedback, and more willingness to engage in evaluating the process that the team is going through. So these are important. Next one, effective team members. So when you created your initial idea about what the team needed to focus on, that began to give you some ideas of who you might need on the team to begin with. And so you want to be sure that you have begun to build the capability sets that you need by inviting people to be part of the process that are going to help inform the solutions that you need to be developed. I'd also suggest in doing that, that you think about the kind of change you think your solution might create. How many people is it going to impact? Where are they in the organization? What is the nature of the change? Is it about acquiring new skills? Is it demonstrating new behaviors? Who do you need to support the change? And be sure that you're including on your team people who are not only representing capabilities and expertise and perspectives, but who can influence people and parts of the organization that you're going to need to influence as your solution begins to try to take hold. So first part is make sure you got the right people on the team. Then make sure that you're, since you don't really know how people operate and you may have some sense of what their capabilities are, it's important for them to be able to talk about what it is that they do, what hidden skills they might possess, and how they're going to, what they think they can bring to the party, and also what their work styles are. You know, some people have different cadence to their work. Some people are more active, some people are more thoughtful. So understanding that, and again, maybe the example I gave you of my other board member is a good example of that. If you can get clear about those things up front, you can avoid some irritation, and you can also then begin to use both the understanding of strengths and work styles to begin to think about how you're going to divide up the work that the team has in front of it. So I'd encourage you to do all of these things. Again, this is a conversation that you're having with the team explicitly around, let's understand what each of us brings to the party, how we work so that we can all work better together. The next area that I want to talk about is role and process clarity. This is really important, and Slack, who some of you may know because Slack is one of those messaging platforms that has been utilized a lot during COVID to help people converse and talk with each other. They did a survey that tried to that looked at what gets in the way of effective collaboration. And one of the things that they found is that clear responsibilities is one of the most important characteristics of successful collaboration, and it's also one of the most common problems of effective collaboration. And so really taking the time to begin to work on this is pretty important. So what does that look like? First of all, you need to create a roadmap of how the work is going to get done. That includes, when are we going to be working together as a full team? When do we work together as a partial team? And what individual responsibilities do we need to be able to define? part of this is important because it helps to balance the workload, and it helps you to begin to recognize that not everybody needs to be involved in every collaborative meeting. So depending on the nature of the work in front of you and what capabilities and expertise and perspectives are important, you should be comfortable having subsets of your collaborative team working on that issue and not requiring the whole team to be together. You also want to be able to talk about how you will in fact collaborate offline. And we're going to talk a bit more about that momentarily. You're going to want to be able to make sure that you're beginning to build agendas, and we'll talk about that a bit further. You're going to want to think about what key performance indicators you're going to use throughout the process so that everybody has a clear view of what success looks like and when you're potentially getting off course. And you want to create that shared view of what the deliverables are. Now doing all these components will help you to avoid stepping on each other's toes as the work gets done. It'll preempt some of the territorial behavior that you can often find in a collaborative effort. It'll hopefully avoid duplicative efforts. It'll be a great way to make sure you're establishing joint accountability and that and what the timing of different deliverables needs to be. And another thing that came out of the research is that I would suggest that you build into your role and process clarity regular check-ins to make sure that things are going as planned, that your key performance indicators are moving forward in the right direction, the timelines are being met, and that the people are feeling comfortable with the process side of the team. There's been research that's shown that the likelihood of reaching your goals increases 95% if you in fact build in regular check-ins to your process. So these are all important things you can do to keep things moving. Now, I want to put an added piece here that gets into how you think about the work. As I've alluded to, some work, you may find that some work could be done entirely virtually, or some work can be done, needs to be done with a mix of virtual and in-person. And there may be some of the work you need to do, and hopefully this will become easier as COVID comes more and more under control, that in-person collaboration is required, and that you are clear about which capabilities need to be there for the work. One of the main things that I think we're going to be seeing here is we're going to be seeing that work is never going to be, that we're going to see more and more hybrid work. And so we need to be prepared to know how to make these choices about the context in the settings. And so being able to be clear, again, about what tasks benefit from diverse expertise and experience, when is diversity in fact a value added, what capabilities add value for the task at hand, and think about things like exchange of information. Probably don't need to have everybody together in person. I would even question sometimes whether or not you need to have people even virtually at the same time. There are lots of ways to exchange information without requiring people to get on Zoom and sit around the table and look at each other. And so that's one that I think is relatively clear and straightforward. Now, it gets a little less clear if what you're trying to do is you need to consult on problems or create new solutions, or if you're trying to coordinate activities across the different groups that are involved in the collaboration, if you're trying to make some critical decisions, and also if you have significant disagreements amongst the team. Those are things that you probably do want to be in person if you can be, at least in many of those cases. And how much of what you can do virtually and how much you need to do remotely also depends on how well you've established some of these other elements. And so the stronger your foundation of trust and safety and some of the other elements, the easier it will be for you to be able to do this work remotely. Important thing to keep in mind, and again, we're finding, excuse me one second here while I get a drink, is that as workplaces are thinking about bringing people back to work, and when should they, who should they, et cetera, there's a lot of evidence there that shows that motivation of people is higher when they have a choice of the context in which they're working in. People have now had the experience of working from home, both the benefits of that and the negatives of that. They also know what they're missing from coming into work, some of which are the positive relationships, the water cooler conversations, some of which is other things like not having to drive in traffic, not leaving your family behind and spending that time in traffic. So there's a lot of reasons why people want to work in person or why they want to continue to work remotely. So I think it's important for you to begin to engage people in these conversations so that they feel like that the answers that come out about where you're doing your work have a firm foundation and are not just arbitrary. So I'd encourage you to do that in the context of the collaboration, as well as obviously in the broader context of what your organization's doing in terms of work from home. Now, another thing I want to talk about is not all virtual work needs to be done at the same time. So you don't always have to be synchronous with the work that you're doing. I'm sure many of you have experienced the idea of sharing documents using things like Google Docs and Teams. That's a great way to do it. And it's a great way to make sure that information is being changed and that input is being received. One thing that I've learned from doing this is to be sure to not just put in edits to somebody's materials, but to put in the comments that help to explain why you're making that suggestion or change so that it is able to foster the dialogue more effectively. I've also found examples of people working side by side. So you can both have Zoom open, you can be doing independent work, but then you have the opportunity to check in, to ask each other a question and continue back to your work. And then obviously messaging, things like Slack and Teams and other messaging services can be used to help you work asynchronously, but check in and tap into each other when you need to. The important thing at the bottom of this slide is you don't want the technology to determine how often or how long you'll engage, but so you do want to be able to be clear about how you use this and how often you'll use it. When you do have remote meetings, you want to be able to optimize those meetings. And so you can see some things listed here that will help both the efficiency of the meeting and the engagement and build space for the diverse perspectives and participation of everybody in the call. You don't want your meetings to be structured in a way that it's easy or natural for people to fall into the observer mode. One of the things I hate, by the way, about webinars is that you're all out there observing and I'm doing all the talking. That's not the way to run a collaboration. So structure the meetings accordingly. And so things like sending out your agenda ahead of time with clear content and clearly defined roles for people who are part of the meeting is important. Perhaps rotating the schedule of call facilitators from meeting to meeting or even within meetings. The board that I'm chairing, we have committees and we're having committees be responsible for different parts of the meeting in order to make sure that all the people in that group are involved. Another great technique is something that I like to call walk the table, where you start by asking everyone the same question and then everyone has a chance to respond. And a great way to do that is using the nominal technique where you state your question. You each ask each member to think about their response and to jot down that response. And then you go around and everybody gets a chance to share what they say. And someone creates a list of all the ideas that are coming out. You don't talk about the ideas at this point. You just get everybody's ideas out on the table. Then you get into discussing all the ideas generated, why people created them the way they did, etc. And you can get into prioritization. This technique is great to make sure that you're bringing out diverse perspectives, and particularly for people who perhaps in many cases might be more sitting back and being quiet. Again, I found with meetings that I've been responsible for that in doing that, some of the best ideas are coming from the people who might not have offered them forward if we hadn't structured the walk the table in this way. So that's a great technique that you might try to take on. Another thing that's important is this one about giving credit when it's due. I know I've been in a position, and maybe you have as well, where you put an idea out, the group doesn't really pick up on it, and then somewhere down the road, someone else says essentially the same thing, and all of a sudden, it's a wonderful idea. That can make the person who presented the idea initially question whether or not they're being valued and whether or not they're being effectively heard in the group. So if you're the one facilitating that meeting, I would suggest that you both credit the person who's come up with the idea most recently, but try to go back and give credit to where some of that earlier viewpoint was put out there. And very often it might just be that the team wasn't ready to hear it, not an impact of the individual style or presentation or credibility. You want to be able to celebrate different views and opinions. You want to call them out. When people have different perspectives, that's good. And in fact, you want to help them work through those perspectives if that's important. You want to coach them through conflict. Again, applying this whole idea of the 5 whys. Why do you think that way, person A? Why do you think that way, person B? And really trying to get through that process will help people get through the conflict. It will help you get to better answers, and it will help people continue to take risks. It'll continue to build that trust and that psychological safety that is so important. Okay, we're at our last element here, shared decision making. And what this is really about is getting clear about how you want to make your decisions. And there's a variety of ways that you can make decisions. You can have it be that the team leader, in some cases, is going to say, I'm making the decision, I'll let you know what I decided. Very often in a collaborative effort, that's not a great way to do it, but there may be situations where that's the most appropriate. And being clear about when would that be the case up front, not at the time that you're having to make it, is a great way to make it easier if and when that time comes up. Another way to do it is, you're going to get input, but the team leader is still going to be making the decision. Again, when would that approach be most appropriate? How about consensus or consensus with fallback, which is basically that the team leader maintains the right to kind of overrule a consensus decision based on certain reasons and rationale. Another one is team members make the decisions within constraints. Again, you can make decisions within a certain dollar amount, within a certain level of commitment, et cetera. So being clear about that. And then finally, majority rules. It's important to really think about which approach you're going to use for which kinds of decisions. Jeff Bezos, for example, at Amazon talks about type 1 and type 2 decisions. Type 1 decision, it's permanent. If we do this one, we're kind of locked in, and we're gonna keep moving down this road in face of whatever obstacles may come up. Type 2 is that it's more easily reversible. So if you have a type 1 decision, you may want to use a more restrictive decision-making approach. If you have a type 2 decision, you may be comfortable using a more open-ended one of these approaches. You should also be looking at the complexity of the decision, the importance of the decision, the cost of the decision, and the level of commitment that the organization is making as a result of the decision. But again, talking about through these things at the beginning makes it easier when you come to a point of making a decision. And that really is pretty darn important. So we're at the end of the elements. Those elements hopefully make sense to you, and you can make use of those as you go through establishing your collaborative efforts. There's still things that get in the way, and so let's take a look at this. This is some very recent research. You can see the reference up there, and I encourage you to go and try to track it down. But basically, Rob Cross and his colleagues did some pretty extensive research. They used an approach called network analysis. They looked at more than 30,000 employees. They had 100 leaders, and this was across 20 different organizations. And they found that team failure was most often the result of one of these 6 traps, and it undermined performance in 88% of the organizations. So these are not occasional events. These are things that happen with some frequency. And let me just, highlight a couple of them. You've got them there. And again, I encourage you to look at Rob Cross's article. So let's take a look at hub and spoke, where the decision-making is slow. And typically that's because a group needs to come to a central point in order to make a decision. Well, obviously what we just talked about earlier about decision rights is one way to begin to take this on. And if you're finding a hub and spoke interaction is really slowing things, you may want to go back and revisit some of that decision making. You may also want to integrate some of the expertise through more of the joint work so that people aren't as isolated off on the rim of the wheel. Another one I'll talk about, misaligned team members. And this is when groups don't communicate with each other, efforts are not well integrated. And again, you might want to go all the way back to reviewing your shared purpose. Let's all remember why we're here, what we're trying to accomplish. You may want to go back to what the norms are that you've established and the key metrics that you've established, not only for the work, but for the process that you're focused on. And you want to go back and look at some of the things you did around relationships and top team member strengths. Those are all steps you can take, going back, re-examining some of the key elements and seeing if there are things you can do to help correct the problem. Isolated team members. This is when you get hard borders between the block engagement and the resources are not being well utilized as a result of that. Part of that is that you want to reduce what may be some tunnel vision or some skunk work kind of activity by refocusing everybody back to why you're all there, and look at some of the other team norms as well. And then finally, priority overload. This is when people on your team find that, for example, their real job is taking them away from their ability to contribute to the collaboration. Again, you can look at your priorities and timelines and see if there are ways to adjust to accommodate those real needs, or you may want to revisit with the sponsors of those individuals, the people who allowed those folks to come work on the collaboration, to re-emphasize, to understand what the work priorities are of that person, to reestablish the importance of the collaboration that you're leading, to try to get people more freed up to be able to do the work at hand. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. So Lisa, be ready in a moment. Here you see the poll, and we're looking at the 6 dysfunctions, and I've shortened the definitions a bit. And what I'd like to see is which of these dysfunctions have you found has created the most problems, either because of the prevalence or the amount of disruption that it occurs in your experience with collaboration. So just take a few seconds and pick the one that you think meets the criteria of being the most problematic.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll.
Okay.
And share. All right, it seems that 63% believe that it's mostly misaligned team members. 44% feel that there's a priority overload. 13% chose hub and spoke interaction, and 6% said disenfranchised team members.
Okay, so again, the top 2 or 3, Lisa, were
misaligned team members,
okay,
priority overload, and hub and spoke interaction.
Okay, great. So again, I would say that the misaligned team members really emphasizes this need to focus on that purpose and why you're all there, and the relationships and team member strengths to try to make sure that you're utilizing people fully and in the most effective way. And so I encourage you, if that's your area of concern, to make sure that you pay attention to those elements in particular. So one more slide in the main thread of the presentation. So if you're going to put together a successful collaboration strategy, what we've talked through should allow you to create a strategy that clearly defines the purpose of the collaboration, what skills you have on the team and need on the team, how you're going to, what norms you're going to have for team interaction and for decision making, how work will be defined in all the ways that we talked about, where work will be defined, and finally, and it's important that this is last, what technology you're going to use to support the work and how it will be used. So you might want to think about creating a strategy for your collaboration that obviously will evolve as the collaboration develops, that really addresses each of these. And if you pay attention to the elements that we talked about, that should help you develop your strategy in a way that hopefully you will be able to realize the benefits of bringing all these great people with wonderful ideas and expertise together to do the work in front of them. So let's get to some reflection questions that we can leave you with. So as you think about what we've talked about, going back to even the initial poll, which opportunities in your organization do you think will benefit the most from effective or more effective collaborations? And once you've identified those, what do you think needs to happen for that value to be fully received? And what is it you can do to help realize the value of that collaboration? So hopefully you can do some thinking about that and really try to move that forward. So let's go to one final thing. So we're going to give you an opportunity to use a technology tool that I personally have found to be very effective and useful. It's called Waggle. And what it is a pulse poll technology and also has crowdsourcing involved in it. And so we're going to be sharing a link with you that will allow you to go in and answer these two questions. Is collaboration important in your organization, and what's the most important step you will take to enhance those collaborative efforts? The first one is basically a yes or no. The second one is more an open-ended question. So type in whatever your answer to that is, and then you'll be given an opportunity to see other people's answers, and it'll be done in pairs. And so you'll see two other responses, and you are asked to pick the one that you think resonates the most with you. And then those pairs will be cycled. And what this will do at the end is it will produce a ranking of those responses that you as a group found to be most effective and resonated the most in terms of the most important step. This tool is a great way to broadly engage people across your organization or within a large collaborative effort. And so we thought it would be a fun thing for you to try out for yourselves. So you'll see that at the end, and you'll see that appear in the chat after we've gone through the Q&A session. Okay, ooh, where's my question slide? I don't have the question slide in here. So why don't we go to the Q&A?
Great, great. So Bob, you can actually go to the next slide. And just as a reminder, the Waggle link is in the chat box for those folks that want to access that either now or copy and paste it at the end of the presentation. I want to thank you, Bob, very much. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with you over the course of all of these years, culminating in, well, not culminating, but in writing the book together and focusing on collaboration. Who knew when we wrote the book that we would be facing a pandemic and virtual work, that we'd all have to modify our behaviors in order for us to be effective working in this new environment, and that the skills and tools and techniques that we wrote about in the book would become even more important today. So I really, really appreciate you sharing your perspective on collaboration and the techniques, practical techniques that you've talked about today. So thank you, thank you. As a reminder to the audience, there are handouts in the dashboard as well that highlight some of the tools and techniques that Bob talked about today. So please download those. They will also be available in the email that will be sent out following the session with a link to the video as well. And before we move on to the Q&A, I just wanted to remind everyone of our final session on Thursday, March 18th at 12 noon Eastern Time. I'm really looking forward to facilitating an open dialogue with all of the Future of Work faculty, Bob, David, Binba, and Rob, who will come together to answer your questions and provide additional insights into what's to come as we learn to excel our workforces today and into the future. So that will be an open mic opportunity for everyone. So Bob, we do have a number of questions that came through the audience. First is, when a collaborative effort has already gone, quote unquote, off the rails, is there a best practice for getting back on track?
Well, first of all, I'd say there are many, and I think the dysfunctions we just talked about, is a useful place to start. So is that derailment a result of any one of the 6 dysfunctions that I shared with you just a little while ago? And if so, being able to take some of the steps that are suggested depending on which dysfunction is the right way to go. Again, I think the other component to that, though, is underlying all of this is to first of all call the question. Get out there and not let the elephant stay in the back of the room. Put it right out on front and say, look, this is not getting us where we need to go, and I would like us all to spend some time talking about the experience and understand what's going on here. And so, for example, using an after-action review, which is one of the techniques that I talked about, where you start with what did we want to have happen, what is happening, why is it happening, and what can we do better, is a great way to do it. So hopefully it's not so derailed that the train is, on the side and burning, and one of those steps will work.
Great. Second question, any ideas or techniques to entice vulnerability in a group who meets virtually and doesn't want to admit they don't have all the answers?
Whew, that's a good one. Well, again, I think, first of all, it takes time. So people have to build that foundation of trust. And so, doing all the things we talked about to build trust is sort of the simple answer. I think a big part of it is the modeling that the person who's asking the question can do in the group, being able to admit to things that they don't understand or know, and why they think it's so important for people in the group to be able to fill in that area. If a mistake is made, to be willing to say, you know what, that was not me at my best, or I didn't make a good decision there, and it wasn't because I wanted to make a good decision, but I didn't, and here's what happened, and so I'm sorry if that held us up, and let's try to move forward. So modeling the vulnerability yourself is a great way to do it. And then finally, when somebody does show even some signs of being open and being willing to share and to risk, to really celebrate that and to really encourage people to do more of it.
Okay. Really enjoyed the point about priority overload as a derailer of collaboration. Other than engaging sponsors, are there ways that we can help team members overcome the priority overload?
Well, the thing that I think is closest to being under the control of the collaborative effort is the work that the collaboration is doing. And so, really looking at, first of all, can the timeline be adjusted? Was it realistic to begin with? Are there other people on the team who can also support the work that that somebody is doing, and give them a more support? Are there deliverables that perhaps aren't as high priority? So we're working on 5 things. Would 2 of them give us 80% of what we really need, and we can modify our priority list? So really looking at the agenda, the time commitments, and the opportunity to have other team members support people who are overloaded. And a lot depends too on whether or not that overload is temporary because of things that are happening in the person's real job, or if that's going to be an ongoing problem. And obviously, another way is to give the person an opportunity to step away from the team and to try to integrate somebody with those capabilities to fill in that gap.
Excellent, excellent. Terrific. We just hit the mark at 1 o'clock. I want to be respectful of the participants' time. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Bob. You can contact us at info@tldgroupinc.com. Those questions will go directly to Bob. And we thank you very much and look forward to our next week's call where we'll open up dialogue for all of the presenters. Bob, thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Tracy.
All righty. Thank you.